Hello friends, welcome back to the Jamie Bolam Podcast. My guest today is my good friend and college mate Miles Donahue. Miles and I are both students at St Cross College at the University of Oxford, and Miles is currently reading a Master's in Philosophical Theology. Now if that sounds intellectual, it's because it is. I found that everyone at St Cross is super smart and lovely, and Miles is no exception to this. Hailing from Albuquerque, New Mexico, the homeland of Breaking Bad, Miles, aka Smiles, for his positive attitude and winning smile, is an absolute legend, and in his free time is a fantastic pianist and avid gym goer. Now, you might have heard the word theology and thought, oh, what an absolute dud of a subject. What is the point of this? Well, that's exactly the kind of stuff that we're touching on today. Listen on to hear why philosophical theology beats theology in a fistfight hands down, Miles' experience as a gay Christian, the value of religious teachings and institutions, even if you're not religious yourself, the question of the existence of hell, how cancer scares can bring us into a closer appreciation of the beauty of life, the importance of gratitude and thinking about death. I promise this episode is more fun and positive than it sounds, don't worry guys. Our thoughts on life at the University of Oxford so far, and much, much more. If you enjoy this episode, please follow me on your favourite streaming platforms for more. So you don't miss out on anything due to algorithm madness, I've made a free email newsletter that you can sign up to at jamiebolam.substack.com. I hate spam and much prefer speaking to writing, so as of now, the only intentions I have with the newsletter is to alert you guys to when an exciting new episode is being released and who is slated to come on the podcast in the future. I might add some other bits, like what music I've been listening to lately, but I'm taking this one step at a time and I'm a busy guy, so there won't be anything too crazy on there just yet. You can also follow me on Instagram at jamie.a.bolam. Like the newsletter, I will just use this page to share updates on the podcast, but I might also share some calisthenics, some Latin dancing, basically anything that looks super cool, treating it like a public PR page for myself. So I would love it if you would give me a cheeky follow on there as well. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you, without further ado, Miles Donahue. And yes, that rhymed on purpose. Ha ha ha! Okay, welcome back to the Jamie Bolam Podcast. My guest today is my friend Miles Donahue. Would you like to introduce yourself, Miles?
Oh, I would love to, Jamie. Thank you. My name is Miles Donahue. I'm a graduate student at the University of Oxford, and I'm studying philosophical theology.
Wow. Mm-hmm. What does that entail?
Well, the actual coursework is studying one different topic a week from within philosophy of religion or theology, and reading as much as I can, and then writing a 5,000 or so word paper on week. That week. Yeah. It shapes up to be more like 6 papers over 8 weeks. Basically, it's a lot of writing, but I love writing. Yeah. So it's a lot of independent study.
That's hardcore. Okay, Now when people talk about theology, if somebody ever says they study theology, most people will probably think that's an absolute waste of time and money.
Well, it's funny you say that because I'm partial to that mentality. Oh, really? Okay. Not because I think what I'm doing is a waste of time, but because mine is the specific overlap between philosophy and theology. And if you just study theology proper, you may not even address the questions that a philosophical theologian would. Depends on what your area of theology is. Because the philosophical theologian is going to be the one that will ask questions about whether or not these beliefs or doctrines are plausible, whether they can withstand like intellectual scrutiny. The theologian proper may never ask those kinds of questions. He may just try to formulate doctrines based on the Bible, for example, and not really consider objections to them. Okay. So I like to be at the overlap specifically between theology and philosophy.
Okay, cool. So what made you want to study philosophical theology then?
I would say that it was something I grew into over time. I grew up pretty religious, a conservative Christian, and then as I grew up, I mean, even since I was young, I was always asking questions about Christianity, about the Bible, to whoever would listen to me. And I was just very curious. I wanted to know more. I wanted to learn more. And so then I discovered the field of Christian apologetics, which is the attempt to provide arguments for Christianity that could convince even a non-Christian. But then from there, I found just philosophy generally,
Yeah.
and philosophy of religion specifically, which doesn't have as its goal trying to prove Christianity. But I thought, well, maybe there is something that could support my religious worldview or not, or undermine it.
Yeah.
And so I like approaching it with a genuinely open mind about whether or not I will actually continue to hold these beliefs.
Yeah.
Changed my mind before.
That is a...
So going into philosophical theology just grew from a natural curiosity about religion.
Yeah. No, that's really good. Like, a lot of people will like dogmatically hold on to something.
Yes.
But like the way you put your ideas to the test is by putting them to the test, right? And
that's exactly right.
trying to evaluate them. So yeah, I guess quick disclaimer then. So you're Christian.
That's right.
I'm agnostic, for anyone wondering.
Yep.
But so as somebody, unless they're like, so anyone who might read the title, whatever we think of for the title of this podcast, like if it's theology or like Christianity, like why is, say, philosophical theology, or like what's the value for someone who's not a Christian or isn't a theologian buff?
Right. It's going to depend. The answer to that question will depend on whether or not from the Christian perspective or from a non-Christian perspective.
Yeah.
I mean, from the Christian perspective, theology proper, which would just be the attempt to systematize biblical beliefs, to analyze what the Bible says about hell or about the Trinity or about God's nature, and state it systematically. And you think, okay, well, what's the point of that kind of theology? Well, if you think that the Bible is the Word of God, then you are formulating true doctrines and beliefs. You're learning the truth about who God is, how to relate to Him, how to find salvation, perhaps, because it all follows from the premise that the Bible is inspired. That's typically how the theologian proper will proceed, is we assume the Bible is without error in all that it teaches, and then we try and derive its teachings in a coherent, systematic way. And so if you agree with that premise, well, it's probably the most important field of study there is.
Yeah.
If you don't accept that premise, then theology just kind of becomes religious studies, a very prolonged and perhaps less than meaningful approach, because it's like, if you don't think the Bible is the Word of God or errorless or whatever, why spend all your time trying to study what it teaches about religious doctrine at the level a theologian would? So I would say that if you're not a Christian, you're not going to find much value in theology.
Yeah. Or just any religion studying theology, I guess.
Yeah. So you mean like other religions' theologies besides Christianity?
I guess so.
Yeah. I would say that if you're not a Christian, you would look at it in the same way that you look at like just religious studies proper.
Yeah.
Which has some value, but it definitely isn't going to have the deep existential value that it holds for a committed Christian.
Yeah.
But that's about like strict theology. So anyway, that's what the value of theology would be. It'll very much be determined by your actual religious beliefs. But philosophy of religion or philosophical theology, I think, could be of deep interest to everyone, because as a philosopher of religion, you don't take the basic truth of your worldview for granted and then just try and work out the implications. You try and assess the assumptions that the theologian proper would have, and you're asking, is this true? Are there objections to it? Does it withstand scrutiny? And I think that the atheist, the theist, the agnostic, or a member of a different religion entirely would be engaged in that conversation, because they have answers to those questions. They're just different answers than the theist.
Yeah.
So then you debate.
Yeah.
Which is what I like. That's where I like to be, is at the debate.
Nice. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
I guess that so the value of religion, I guess, like, I know one thing I think, I wrote this at the bottom of the Q list as well. So I have this theory, right, like tying into evolution and natural selection. So you have that like a genetic level, but especially as humans or any animal with like behaviors.
Yes.
Those behaviors, you can have some behaviors that are good for you, like going to the gym, and you can have some behaviors that are very bad for you, like chain smoking 500 cigarettes a day.
Yes.
For example, right? And obviously, if you're chain smoking 500 cigarettes a day, you're probably going to die earlier.
Yes.
Right? So over time, those kind of bad behaviors would be selected out, right?
Yes.
So I have this idea that because religions as institutions have survived, in Christianity's case for 2,000 years, right?
Yes.
For Hinduism's case, 5,000 years, etc. If they conferred the negative overall impact on humanity, they would have just died out, right? And I'm sure you see that with many religions. So the ones that have persisted for so long, they must have conferred some sort of societal benefit, regardless of whether you believe
Yeah.
in the actual doctrines
Truth
and creation
of it, yeah.
stories and stuff. Like, just like the way you act as
Yes.
a religious person in those sense, the rules they put in place, maybe we couldn't have explained them back in the past,
Yes.
but I feel like they must have conferred benefits. For example, people who live together before they get married, studies show that they're more likely to get divorced, which is the opposite of what
Isn't
you
that
think,
weird?
right?
Yeah, I've
Really
heard that
weird,
too.
you know? Or people who have more sexual partners report less sexual satisfaction. Yeah, so things like that. You're like, hang on a minute, maybe
Yeah.
maybe the religions are onto something, right?
No, that's an excellent. I don't want to cut you off.
No. Yeah,
I think
go
that's
for it.
an excellent point that I've never really thought about it that way. That given how biological evolution takes place, it would seem that the only reason that these religions and the religious impulse that people have has survived for so many thousands of years has to be because there's some survival advantage to it. Yeah. There are definitely different theories about the ultimate origin of religion within like the cognitive science of religion or evolutionary psychology. But I think that is a general point that's correct. There has to be some reason it's endured and spread to just about everyone. The vast majority of humanity is religious in some sense or another. And so you have to then ask, okay, well, what is the benefit? And I think that's a good question.
Yeah.
So honestly, typically the like sociological impact of religion is not something I know much about.
Yeah.
It's a lot of atheists
neither.
are engaged in that conversation, and I think it's an important one.
Yeah.
I really have just been focused on the philosophical questions that arise from it.
Yeah.
So I just don't know too much.
Yeah.
Like maybe it's terrible for the world, but then I'll still ask as a philosopher, does God exist?
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, no, exactly.
But they're both important questions.
Yeah.
But I do think what that shows is that there has to be some benefit
Yeah.
to being religious since it's here, it's stuck around.
Yeah. So I think in that sense, even say as an atheist or an agnostic, like I feel like a lot of religions, like they will try and get the same kind of ideas, you know, in the philosophical part, like how would you be a good person? What does a good life constitute? Etc. So I think like you can really derive value from that part of it, and that's what I get from talking, you know, with like religious people and like especially with the Christians I met.
Well, it's funny you say that because I agree that the ethical component of religions can be very positive, but even then you have to be careful. I mean, I think very few people today would look at the Christian ethic, especially the Christian sexual ethic, and would agree with it.
Yeah,
they would actually argue, as I would, it's a moral negative influence.
Let's get into that.
Yeah, absolutely. We can talk about that because that's important.
Should you hold hands before marriage?
Yeah, obviously that's all lunacy.
Yeah.
But yeah, there is. So I've gone back and forth from it around those issues. Obviously, I mean, there's several different things that come up when you're talking about Christian sexual ethics. It's not just like same-sex marriage, homosexuality. It's also premarital sex, and like you said, living together before marriage. And I kind of have a weird conjunction of viewpoints on those questions because I'm gay and I'm openly gay, and but also I've heard the evidence that if you treat marriage as the beginning of when you live together, for example, it's of a much higher quality moving forward because then there's a real difference then between pre-married and post-married life, which I think makes it more significant. Yeah. Versus if you just live together beforehand, it's kind of like all you did was just change the title. Exactly. The substance was exactly the same. Exactly. And so I'd be very open to like more traditional understandings of marriage in that respect. Yeah. I just can't get behind the whole can't be gay thing.
Yeah. So what's been your experience with that? So you said you grew up in like a conservative Christian environment. So yeah, how did that? What's your experience?
It was pretty brutal, mainly because not from my parents necessarily. They weren't very political. They were conservative in their like religious beliefs, strictly speaking. Yeah. The ethics and the social and political policies that usually follow from that, they didn't really talk about much. Okay. So in that sense, it was fine. But the problem was that I was very, very devoted to that brand of Christianity, personally. Yeah. And so I tried my best until I was 20 to just not be gay, to not think the thoughts, to not engage in any sexual activity, to do whatever I could to be chaste and celibate, right? Yeah. And then I go into college. No
girls allowed.
I probably would have let girls in because I'd be like, that's a lot better than dudes from a moral perspective. In my thought process at the time. Yeah. But then I went to college, my freshman year. I don't know what they call it here, but my freshman year. I kind of was on the verge of a panic attack for a while there because it had built up for so long, and I was I was confronted with the fact that if I really were to commit to this, it would be lifelong celibacy.
Yeah.
If I were to commit to the traditional Christian biblical teaching, and I just knew that there was something wrong with that.
Yeah.
So then it all kind of fell apart.
Yeah.
And then I looked into ways that scholars have proposed to reinterpret biblical teaching on homosexuality. That conversation isn't as important to me anymore because I'm much more comfortable with the more provocative conclusion that the Bible just teaches a falsehood in this area.
Yeah.
That the right interpretation of the text is just wrong,
Okay.
ethically speaking. So I'm open to that more radical
Interesting.
shift.
Yeah. Nice. So yeah, I guess like going on from that. So one difference, not that I know much about Islam at all, but so one of my good friends, Remy, practicing Catholic, he'll come on the podcast at some point, 100%.
Yeah.
So he lived many years in Egypt. He had many good Muslim friends there.
Okay.
And he said one thing. He was explaining this in French. So I presume the translation where he described the Quran as incréé. So it's like uncreated, right?
Yes.
It's like the literal word of God
Yes.
put onto paper. So you cannot change it at all. Like that, what it says is what you got to do, right?
Right.
Whereas in Christianity, because you have the Gospels according to Mark or according to
Right.
John, like that Christianity has this kind of flexibility, and people can interpret it in different ways.
You do.
In that sense, obviously, people interpret Islam in different ways as well, but it seems much more like flexible in Christianity from my perspective.
It's very true that, as far as I know, again, like you, my knowledge of Islam is very limited, but I do think most Muslims and Islamic scholars do hold that the Quran is, in a sense, eternal with God.
Yeah.
People didn't write it like that we maintain about the Bible, which even the most conservative Christian will acknowledge that there is a human element that was involved in the composition of these books. It's not the Bible, after all, isn't one book. It's a series of 66. 66 books that were written over thousands of years, and so it is a human document in addition to a divine document, if that's how you look at it. But it is at least a human document.
Yeah.
I think there are really complicated and important questions about how to then interpret the Bible, and I think because we can know that those questions are so complicated because there are so many denominations and different sets of beliefs that claim that they are the quote unquote biblical teaching.
Yeah.
I've had to confront the fact that for a wide array of issues, it may just be that the Bible doesn't clearly state one way or the other. So it gets tough to work out the details.
So how did you go about figuring out what flavor of Christianity is right for you, like which denomination? Do you go by the vibe, or do you go by set? They obviously have their doctrinal differences.
I still haven't found one that I'm comfortable saying this is what I think and this is the church I want to attend, because you have the theological issues and you have the social issues. Socially, most groups of Christians that I interact with in the last 5 years since coming out, in most church environments that I'll walk into, I no longer identify with it, and I don't feel comfortable in that group. There's something about it that just isn't me anymore. So I'm trying to find a place where I can feel comfortable. Yeah. But of course, that's not to say anything about what the church teaches or what the doctrine is. It's just purely on this subjective feel level. I've yet to find you. What
would you say that is? Could you try and pinpoint?
Uncomfortable. A very unwelcoming space sometimes.
Okay.
Not all the time, and not all Christians whatsoever, but specifically the churches that I was at in America, in New Mexico, and I would go to, it wasn't me anymore. And it's funny because I went to a mega church growing up as a kid, and I loved it, felt very comfortable. And now going into that exact same environment here at 24, it doesn't feel like a welcoming space. And especially, it was one time I was in this Bible study right after I came out, and I was still hanging on to that mega church. And I went to a men's Bible study, and it was just such an awful thing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because halfway through, they started talking about how hard it is to be a Christian today because of they stand for the truth about same-sex marriage and homosexuality. Something they said. Yeah. And I was like, I do not want to be part of this really bizarre pity party.
Yeah.
From people who argue things that I very much reject.
Yeah.
But I do. The struggle now is that I don't want to reject the entire thing just because I don't accept certain parts of it. You should never throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Exactly.
Or separating the wheat from the chaff, for a second metaphor.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to find, to answer your question in short, I'm trying to find out where I fit these days.
Yeah.
And that's what motivates the philosophical theology, is I'm trying to make up my mind on several significant religious questions.
Okay. What are those questions? I think the first time we met, I think we were at Scriptorium, which we can get into. Actually, let's explain it now. What is Scriptorium? How did we meet, Miles?
Yes, we met at this thing called Scriptorium that there's a library and a church conjoined with my college at Oxford, and the library there has a day-long study session 3 times a week, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So you go to the library, they have scheduled coffee breaks, a lunch break, and I met Jamie at one of those meetings. And so it's nice to have like a full day laid out to structure it, and you don't have to do that yourself.
Exactly. I think having the breaks really helps.
Yes.
Like an hour and a half is plenty of time for a work block.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, because otherwise, when I do it myself, I'll take a break every 5 minutes, or I'll try and go 3 hours.
Yeah.
Without break. It's like,
exactly.
Don't do that.
No, it is nice as well. So yeah, I think the first time we met, I think you said one of the questions you were grappling with was like the existence of hell.
Yes.
Well, I'm pretty sure that was it. So yeah,
yes.
What other questions are you grappling with? And let's jump into some of them.
Yeah. So that's the main one. Is my one issue with Christianity has always been, even since I was young, this belief in hell. Yeah. It can that doctrine, that belief, the set of beliefs, be rationally defended? The basic gist is that the existence of a loving God seems incompatible with something as horrible as otherwise decent people ending up in hell forever. Yeah. How do you make those two consistent with each other? It's, on the face of it, a loving God would never allow that. So that's one set of issues, is relating to hell, relating to teachings about the afterlife and salvation, the exclusive claims of Christianity that you can only be saved by believing these things. Yeah. That is what I've always struggled with, primarily. And then you do have some of the ethical issues with the Bible, principally, as we talked about, homosexuality. But I'm less interested in that because I've pretty much made up my mind. Yeah. Other interesting questions would be, with the Bible specifically, is trying to evaluate the Old Testament God, or God as he's depicted in the Old Testament. Oh, yeah. Seems like a very wrathful and unloving being. And so how do you properly interpret those passages that talk about God in that way, if you actually think, in fact, he does exist and he's all loving? Yeah. How is that consistent with some of his actions in the Old Testament?
Like what kind of things?
What does he get up to? Yeah. The main one that most people have a problem with, among others, is the slaughter of the Canaanites. Okay, what was that? That story is related in, like, I think the first 8 or so books of the Bible at different parts. Yeah. That God commanded the Israelites to go into the land of Canaan and slaughter every man, woman, and child that they encountered to take over the land. And on the face of it, it is very difficult to see how a perfectly loving God could issue that kind of command. Yeah. And that's just one. But even then, I would say that the total of so-called like biblical difficulties with the Bible, are a relatively minor concern of mine. Mm-hmm. Mine are even more fundamental at the very foundations of a Christian worldview. Does God exist? And how do we assess arguments for atheism? How do we assess the philosophical coherence of things like the Trinity or the Incarnation, which is the idea that God became a man? How is that coherent? So these really big picture fundamental issues with Christianity are the ones that occupy my mind the most, because I would love to retain the belief in the Bible that many Christians have, that it is true in all that it teaches. It's inspired in that sense. But I just don't know how to defend a claim like that once you read through the entire Bible. Yeah. So the problem of hell would be the main philosophical problem I have at the moment, that would be the thing that would threaten to unravel the whole worldview if I can't solve it. Yeah. Yeah. That's fair.
I think one thing I heard, it was like, so going on from that, I guess, so if God was omniscient, so, all-knowing, omnipotent, is that all-powerful, and I guess all-loving, and, if he can just do anything and knows everything that's going to happen, right, then why would he create a person knowing, even if you say they've got free will, right? Yes. Why would he create someone knowing that they're going to end up in hell in the first place? And I was like, that's a good question.
Yeah, it is a good question. And Christian philosophers have given different answers to that kind of question. I'll give you what I think is the most plausible of the answers, but one that I'm still debating for myself. But it is, I think, if there's a good response, it'll be somewhere in the neighborhood of that God has chosen a world to create that has an optimal balance between people who find salvation and people who do not. And the claim would be that as long as he affords sufficient grace to the people that ultimately reject him, they can't retain a veto power over God's choice of worlds to create. Because it may be, for all we know, that a world where everyone accepted God and had a relationship with him would only be a world of 10 people or 20 people. Does that mean that God then can't create a world with 7 billion people where, say, 4 billion come to a relationship with him, but 3 billion do not? Not clearly, because what it would be is that the person ending up in hell, that was an outcome of the choices that they made. And so that's where this idea of like people who never turn to God or would never turn to God, the fact that they end up in hell can't prevent God from creating that kind of world. Because one theologian answered it by saying that God's goal is to get as many people as possible into heaven, not merely to prevent as many people as possible from going to hell, right? So his priority is enlarging the number of people in heaven. And so if that means a certain number of people reject him and go to hell, there may be a trade-off consistent with his perfect goodness that he's able to take. I don't know about the ultimate philosophical coherence of that answer, but it is, I think, the most plausible of the ones I've heard.
So how does that contrast with the idea of him being all-powerful then? Because if he's all-powerful, he could just be like, okay, you guys come to heaven.
He could, but it depends on how you define heaven and hell. If we just go with the very general definition, let's say heaven is being in the presence of God, and hell is being in the total absence of God and everything that he is. He could force people into his presence, but I think the idea is that he allows people to choose.
Yeah.
And then they can live with the consequences of that choice, but it is their freely chosen fate. And so God respects them as persons, as ends in themselves, and honors their choice. Even though he has the power to just bring them into heaven, if they've chosen not to be there, then he will do, I think, what we would say is the right thing, which is to let them live the life they've chosen.
Yeah.
But then the question, in the abstract, that's a perfectly plausible answer. But in practice, in the real world, are there lots of people who knowingly choose hell?
Yeah.
No, it doesn't seem plausible.
If it was like without a doubt that, Christianity was right and like you will get into heaven and like you will go to hell.
Exactly.
Who wouldn't?
Who would be like, I'd prefer not to.
Yeah.
So you definitely would have to give a more subtle analysis to make it plausibly true in the real world, not some abstract logical possibility.
Yeah.
But that is part of the task ahead of me. What I want to do my master's thesis on is the problem of hell.
Yeah.
And coming to grips with various philosophers' proposed solutions to that problem, and then assessing whether or not it actually holds weight.
Yeah.
Because the alternative would be a kind of universalism, which would say that in the end, everyone is saved. Everyone finds this relationship with God and makes it to heaven. I think that on its face, that's far more in alignment with most people's moral intuitions than an eternal hell.
Yeah, because eternal hell is like...
It's forever, man.
That's forever. Like...
People, I swear, some Christians and some pastors, I think, are thinking about hell superficially, because when you really think about it, the idea that you're doomed forever is... I mean, it can make you feel kind of queasy because it's so horrific.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I think that the only way that I could with integrity say I do accept the doctrine of hell is to face head on this set of issues.
Yeah.
And if I can solve them, great. I don't know that I can.
Yeah, that's fair. I think metaphorically, I can find like value in religious teachings as well, in the sense of like, let's say you say heaven's that you're in the presence of God, and hell is the absence of God. Like, let's say you're following teachings. You're just doing good things. That's how they happen to be consistent with Christianity and stuff. Like, if you're, I don't know, let's say you're dicking around, you're doing bad things you shouldn't do.
Yeah.
Like sinning, etc.
Yes.
Like ultimately, it's going to come and bite you in the ass, right?
Yes.
Like people aren't going to like you, right? You're going to you're just gonna have a bit of a shit time eventually. Right?
Eventually.
Like what comes around goes around.
Yeah.
Whereas like if you're living your best life,
Yeah.
you know, and you're acting with, you know, dignity and honor and just trying to be a good person, like
Yes.
things generally, you know, turn out pretty
Go
well
better.
for you.
Yeah.
So I think even in that sense, like I don't know, in my mind, I'm like, you know, I don't know what I'd call God. I think,
Yeah.
I don't think I don't think God doesn't exist. I don't know if God does exist, but, you know, I'm agnostic.
Yeah.
So
we just kind of reframe.
but I think I can find a value in that sense. Like I feel like,
well,
do you get what I'm kind of
that
grasping
religious
at?
that the religions have value in part because they
Like hell could be a
issue
metaphor
sound
for
ethical.
like your own mental state in that sense, right? Like,
yes.
you can have a very like personal experience of hell in that sense, right?
Yes. The question then though is there a literal hell?
Is there a literal hell? Yeah,
that's the one that gets me.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there a lake of fire?
Yeah, and
right?
and even it's a bit ambiguous because there are theologians that hold what they call a metaphorical view of hell, but what they mean is that it is a place of conscious misery, but it's not a torture chamber.
Yeah.
And so they would say the talk of fire is metaphorical in that sense, but that's slightly different. I think you're absolutely right that generally speaking, developing a nasty character by making poor choices will lead you to be profoundly unhappy. Yeah. So then you could ask, perhaps that is what then extends on into eternity. It's these people who in this life have chosen to cultivate a morally blameworthy character and to not care about doing what's right will just then find themselves after death in a situation where they can continue to go down that path. That's one possibility or way of looking at what hell is.
Yeah. It's pretty deep.
Pretty deep.
Pretty deep.
I know.
Yeah.
But you kind of have to get pretty deep to assess any kind of substantial philosophical or religious question. There's a reason these questions have recurred for thousands of years without agreed upon answers.
Yeah.
It's because it's really fucking complicated.
Yeah, absolutely. So the existence of hell is your main gripe.
Yes, that's my main gripe.
What are your other gripes?
It's a great question. Well, yeah, so as we touched upon, it would be belief in biblical inerrancy, belief that God has inspired the Bible in such a way that everything it teaches is true. Mm-hmm. I find great intellectual and moral difficulties with that claim. I don't have too many issues with distinctly Christian doctrines about Jesus, for example. There actually is a substantial amount of literature which argues that the main historical claims of the Gospels are correct, and that these portraits of Jesus are, in fact, historically reliable portraits. And there's even a vast amount of literature published and peer-reviewed that defends the resurrection of Jesus as a historical event. Now,
How so?
Well, that's a great question.
Is it all written by Christians?
No, well, that's a funny objection because, yes, most definitely the people writing will be Christians. The people defending the resurrection will be Christians. But that is because, almost by definition, if you conclude Jesus rose from the dead, you are then a Christian. So
touche.
You have to wonder how significant that fact is, because there is a chance that people come to faith as a result of their studies. But the point would be that I've really only read the defenses of those historical cases rather than the objections that, say, secular historians would offer. So that is where I would need to really, I think, bulk up in order to call myself objective, to really think about these things is, okay, what does the other side have to say? Because there's plenty of scholars who don't regard the Gospels as historically reliable and obviously don't think Jesus rose from the dead. It's a pretty radical claim for sure. So I guess I wouldn't have issues as of now, though, with those claims. There is a sense in which I'm worried that, whether this is rational or not, that it will be the case that as time goes on, I just give up the Christian worldview, because while in principle you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, once you start to pick apart any kind of worldview, but especially the Christian one, you then sit back and ask, okay, well, if it's wrong about this, could it be wrong about these other things? And then slowly over time, you lose it. And that's not, I don't want that to happen.
Yeah.
If it does happen, I'd want it to be because I've carefully considered everything and then just come to that conclusion. I don't want it to be just the inevitable outcome of one initial doubt that then just grows over time.
Yeah.
Because I think people are naturally inclined to an all or nothing mentality.
Yeah, I think so. Even if, like, let's say you disagree with your friend about something, like, you have to. I think, especially in today's climate, people have to be, especially with politics, which I can get onto with religion because I think there's an interesting thing on that. But, like, let's say you disagree with someone, you have to remember, like, if you disagree with them on like one idea, like, there's still, there's still a lot you do agree on, right?
I think that is a chief problem in, at least what I'm aware of in American culture, is that
you get like a firing circle.
Yeah, you say one thing that's out of alignment with the proposed or accepted narrative, and you are rejected entirely.
Yeah,
and people themselves approach politicians, political commentators, with that methodology as well. It's like, if I can't get behind everything you're saying, I'm going to reject everything that you say.
Yeah.
If I can't fully accept it, I'm going to fully reject it, which is obviously irrational.
Yeah.
It's very irrational.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But none of us are perfectly rational, so it happens.
Yeah.
But I want to resist that in my religious impulses too.
Yeah. I think, because there's a lot of value, I think, that can be gained. So yeah, on a personal level then, so what value do you find Christianity brings you in your religion?
I think that my faith in God is probably at the very core of who I am, with very few other things. Because, I mean, it's probably been the defining factor as I've gone through life and, had to go through really hard periods of time with things that happened that I think otherwise I may not have been able to get through if I didn't have what I take to be a relationship with God. And I know for the atheist, or a lot of people, it sounds so cringy to hear that said, and I get it, I really do. But it also is the case that I really feel that way, is that a faith in God has helped me to make it through the hard times.
How so?
It's
just knowing
difficult.
God exists, or?
No, it's hard to articulate, because for most of my life, I obviously have taken a very intellectual approach to religion, and so I couldn't really understand like Christians when they talk about their personal relationship with God. That always was just an odd concept to me. Yeah. But, for example, maybe this was now 6 months ago, 6 or 7 months ago, there was briefly a time period of like 2 or 3 months where we were worried I had cancer.
Oh, shit.
I didn't, but there were weird markers on blood work that took a long time to decipher.
Yeah.
During that 3 months, it was awful.
Yeah.
It was so awful. I had to just go do everyday life thinking that I might, because the type of cancer it would have been was an extremely pernicious, deadly kind. Yeah. And so, I mean, can you imagine just walking around having to live life and being like, what is wrong? I need to know. Yeah. But I've never felt closer to God than that period of time. So it's hard to explain of what it is.
Did that give you some peace of mind? No?
A peace of mind.
You're like, I'll be okay, like, even if I do.
A peace of mind and like a daily reliance on God to get through things. And, I really, a younger version of myself would hear that and not understand what I'm saying. But I think it just is that if you believe in an all-powerful, all-loving God and you pray consistently, there is a profound peace of mind that can take hold. And perhaps that is a reason why people are religious. And of course, the atheist will say that doesn't mean it's true. It just explains why people believe it. And that's right. That's right. But that is the benefit I get the most, is from what I take to be a relationship with God in navigating life. Yeah. Providing stability, maybe.
Yeah, cool. So what do you find, like, the value of prayer for you? Like, what? Why'd you do it?
Yeah.
And what value does it bring to you?
Well, I do. I mean, I won't lie. Part of my prayer life is petitionary prayer, is requesting things, right? Yeah. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think biblically that's a perfectly legitimate use of prayer. But you really have to look at it literally as a relationship. It's a communication with God. And you can't have even a normal human relationship without communication, at the very least. Yeah. And so it's a means of cultivating that kind of daily awareness and reliance on God. And even now, throughout all my doubts, I still am convinced of that benefit. So that would be what prayer specifically for me is. Not really the petitionary aspects of it, but the cultivation of a daily reliance on God.
Yeah, nice. I think one thing that I've now changed my mind on compared to me when I was much younger was like, I mean, the idea of like giving grace. Like to say, I mean, like I never really saw it in the UK. Not that, I don't know, you never really see it.
Yeah.
But
what do you mean giving grace?
See on say on TV, let's say you're watching some American TV and they say like grace before a meal, like everyone holds hands or says, we're thankful for this meal, thank you God, etc. And I never got that. I was like, man, that's weird. And then, because I'm a weeaboo, right? I like Japanese stuff. They do the exact same thing.
Really?
So like when before a meal, you'll put your hands together and say itadakimasu, which is like, it's like, I humbly receive this meal. You're basically giving grace. You're saying, I'm thankful for this meal.
Yes.
Poor, like, wealthy, like, humble me has received this meal, right?
Yes.
Like, how great. And then after a meal, like, you'll say, like, gochi sousama deshita, which is like, it was a feast, right?
Okay.
And like, somehow I was like, yeah, that's cool. And then I realized, I was like, hang on a minute, like, that's the exact same thing.
It is.
And I think gratitude as well. The one thing I think would change the world really is like if more people are grateful. Yes. I'll write it in my diary every night, like the 3 things I'm grateful for. It could be as superficial as whatever, right? And it could be as deep as whatever. But I think gratitude is something that I like seeing, when people give grace.
Yes. I mean, I wholeheartedly agree. And I had forgotten to mention that point too.
Yeah.
Is cultivating gratitude through a prayer life.
Yeah.
Is extremely important. And there are other ways to do it too, but that is one way, is to consistently reflect upon the good things in your life and thank God for them.
Yeah.
Because a grateful heart and mindset changes the way you experience life, and it makes it better than it would be. Profoundly better, I think.
Yeah.
The opposite would be cynicism, and I don't think that is a means of being happy.
No.
So I totally agree. That's another function of prayer, is cultivating gratitude.
Yeah. Would you see, what are things you wish people would be more grateful for
in the world?
Yeah.
Just the little things. Just being alive.
Yeah,
sounds dumb and cliche, but my God, when I found out I didn't have cancer.
Yeah.
Or rather, you can look at it from 2 perspectives, during and after the scare. So during, I was just overwhelmed with this sheer magnitude of how great life just is in the everyday bullshit that you deal with. And I just wanted that so much in a way that I hadn't before and always taken it for granted.
Yeah.
Now I just wanted to live a long, healthy, happy life.
Yeah.
I didn't need anything great to achieve. I just wanted to live. And so I think, and then after, once I found out I didn't have cancer, it was like such profound gratitude to just be alive and to 100%. Experience the little things, because that's what it is. It's the little things in the end. The big things you do are fleeting.
Yeah,
you get a nice shot of dopamine that then goes away, but it's the things that sustain you are the little things.
Like what?
It would be like being able to get up early in the morning, and I was a bartender, and go work at the bar all day long.
Yeah,
you think, well, why would you be grateful for that? It's a full day affair. But I loved it. I loved being there. I had good friends.
Yeah.
I have good family. Food is good.
Yeah.
I make good food for myself.
Yeah, man.
Those are little things that, it's just human psychology. You take it for granted.
Yeah, you really do.
So I think the things people need to be grateful for are the ones that they have and experience every day.
Yeah.
But until you don't have them anymore, it's hard to see the value.
Absolutely. I had a similar, not quite as long as 3 months, but I did have a cancer scare myself a couple of years ago.
Isn't it
where,
horrifying?
So it was one of those ones where like, I don't know, maybe you had assemblies in school where they'd say like, they like split the boys and girls apart, and they gave the boys like a testicular cancer talk. And they're like, okay guys, go into the shower, have a rummage around.
Yes.
Just see what you find.
I've ever since been very paranoid about the state of my testicles.
Exactly.
I'm like, oh, shoot.
Yeah, exactly.
Is it a lump? No, we're fine.
Yeah, no, exactly. So I thought I found one. So I was like, my heart is saying, like, I was in the shower, right? I was planning my funeral. I was like, what songs are they going to play at my funeral? Like, who's gonna be who's on the VIP list? Like,
Yeah.
you know. But it's horrific, and you know,
It's horrific.
having to then, you know, like then tell my dad, I was like, Dad, like I need to go to the hospital, like to get an ultrasound of my balls, like, you know. Like,
I get it.
It's a horrific thing. Like,
It's a horrific thing. I remember it's dark, but I remember being in the midst of that period, and I was in the shower, and it was just this sense of like, if this really is going to happen to me, because I was just looking at my body and I was like, I'm going to waste away. And it was such a dark feeling.
Yeah,
it's
man.
a nasty place to be. But one positive outcome is a refreshing sense of just how wonderful it is to be alive.
Absolutely, yeah.
And to now, because it happened, I found out about all this and went through this after I found out I was accepted to Oxford by like a week later.
Ah, dude.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. It was the other way around. It was a week before I was accepted to Oxford.
Damn.
I found out about this cancer thing. And so then telling people that I got into Oxford
And you're like,
was,
but will I be alive?
there was
like,
a nasty humor to it because I didn't know if I'd actually be able to go.
That sucks.
Oh, it was such a profoundly exhausting experience to be so happy about Oxford and then so afraid you might have cancer.
Yeah.
And so I think that anybody who came to Oxford would be grateful for it. But it allows me to just ride my bike at night when I'm coming home and look around and just get overwhelmed with gratitude to be here.
Absolutely.
And I think I would have had a measure of that even without the cancer scare. But that certainly put everything into sharp relief.
100%.
Once you have the prospect of a diminished lifespan in front of you, you want nothing more than to just be able to keep going.
Exactly. And I think I'd remind everyone out there, and like, you know, myself as well, and you as well, like, we assume we're going to live till we're 80, but like, you might have a heart attack in your sleep and die tonight.
Yes.
You know, you never know if you're going to wake up in the morning. So,
no,
you know, not to scare anyone before you go to bed, but it is something to, you know, to think about. And, you know, ultimately we will die someday, so it's important to be grateful, but we can get so caught up in life.
Oh, we can.
And, you know, the trivialities of it. I was like, oh no, like I'm meeting a world-renowned leopard researcher, and like my leopard print shirt is in the wash, so I can't make a sick impression.
Yes.
What a dumb thing!
What a dumb thing
to even pass through my mind.
I know, but it's almost impossible to have that perspective 100% of the time. You just slip into it, I get it. But if you can cultivate that of just realizing that, putting everything in perspective. Everything in perspective.
Yeah.
And I think that for me, one benefit, I don't know if it justifies it, but one benefit of, I always have the ever-present threat of nihilism next to me. Yeah. Maybe this is all just meaningless. None of this matters. I'm wrong about religion. Nothing matters. I don't think that's true, but it is a doubt that is there.
Yeah.
And it puts everything into perspective, that just having a meaningful life doesn't require so much of the things that we think that it does. You know, the end goal is not to have a bunch of things and lots of money.
Yeah.
Because nobody, when you think about being the richest man in the graveyard, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't matter.
Exactly.
It does not matter.
Exactly.
It's about people. It's about the things you do and with people that I think is the only thing that really matters in the end.
Yeah. Like I went around the graveyard in Glasgow. They have all these obelisks. I can't remember the name of the graveyard. Very famous. And all of the graveyards there just pimp, you know. The big obelisks and stuff, and you're walking around like, gosh, like, you know.
It's
what's
eerie.
The point? Like, it is eerie.
It's like, why would you?
Why is it such an extravagant tomb? Like,
like you're not here.
Exactly.
Like, what are you doing?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
No, I agree. And so to relate it to something we talked about previously, I do think if there's anything that is like the meaning of life, and I think there is an objective meaning to life, but one way of expressing it that I think is right is that it involves loving other people. It's people that are the ultimate sources of meaning. It's not things. It's not things. And that relates to my faith in God, because the core conviction of mine is that there is a loving God. And I think you could say more about what this God is like, but at least I'm convinced that, like, at a fundamental level, there is a all-loving personal reality behind everything. And what that means is then that it gives me that peace that no matter what happens, no matter where we go, it's going to be okay in the end.
Yeah.
And then to tie it really back into the first question, that it would be the issue with hell is how is it compatible with this conviction that at the base of everything ultimately is a loving God.
Yeah,
so
that's very true.
And I would far more hang on to that proposition than hell. I'd be much more likely to let go of hell. Exactly. Should there be an actual conflict.
Yeah, no, it's much nicer to, like, that's why I say, like, I'm like, it would be nice to be religious. Like,
yeah.
You know?
There are psychological benefits to it.
Yeah.
Of course, as the philosopher, I want to know, but is it true?
Exactly.
I don't want to base my life on a falsehood.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
See, that would be my thing, and I'm like, or like, I guess like we said earlier, like, I can agree with some things, you know, and think they're good, but other things I'm like, you know, I don't want to say like I believe this as well. Like,
no, it comes with a lot of baggage.
You don't want to say you accept everything, but then if you don't, to what extent are you or are you not of that religion? Like, you know, you have to agree with a certain amount
to count
beyond the threshold.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
beyond the threshold.
I remember talking with one of my professors at the University of New Mexico.
Yeah.
And he was asking me, "Do you think Mormons are Christian?" And I said, "No, I don't," and gave reasons along the lines of that they just believe radically different things than classical Orthodox Christians believe. And he's like, "Well, what right do you have to say who is and isn't a Christian?" And it's like, well, I have the same right to say that as I do in defining any other word or concept. There has to be some qualifying features for a certain label or word to apply.
Yeah.
Otherwise, these words mean nothing.
Yeah.
If can you be a Christian atheist? No. Well, who are you to define your Christian that way? Well, that just isn't what the word means. It's not a personal attack. Yeah. It's just that to be Christian and to be atheist mean certain things objectively, and they're not compatible with each other. And so to be Mormon and to be Christian entail different things. And you can be wrong in stating what you think the conditions of being Christian are, but there have to be some conditions if the word is to mean anything.
Fair enough. What are those conditions for you?
I think it's going to be what C.S. Lewis called mere Christianity. These are the bare bones essential beliefs that you have to hold to count as Christian. And, you know, though I've never gone through an exact list in my head, it would be things like the existence of God. You can't be an atheist.
Yeah.
It would be the divinity of Jesus, that Jesus was God among us. His death on the cross for the sins of the world. And probably his resurrection. At least that's clearly reflected in the New Testament. It's said in several places that, you know, to receive salvation, you have to believe Jesus rose from the dead. Yeah. So those four things would easily be the cardinal essentials.
What about your thoughts on the Trinity?
So that's interesting. That may or may not be what would qualify under mere Christianity.
Because there are non-Trinitarian sects, I found. I was walking past this church and I was like, what the hell is a Christadelphian? And I looked up and it was like, you know, a non-Trinitarian sect. So that means they don't believe that the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are all, like, the way
three persons.
You explain it, it's like 1 + 1 + 1 is 1. Yeah. Right? Which doesn't make sense.
It doesn't.
But they're all individually God and they're all together God, right? But then non-Trinitarian sects are like, nah, only God is God. Jesus and the Holy Spirit. Something else.
Well, if they say that Jesus, the historical man, wasn't God, maybe just a good person or a prophet, you might be right, but you're not Christian anymore. So it depends on the specifics, what they take to be entailed by a rejection of the Trinity. But historically, the Trinity is a fundamental belief of Christianity.
Because you say it's the Lord prayer that Jesus taught. You know, it's like in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Like, Amen. Like,
and so then you'd have to ask, okay, what follows if we think there's only one person that is God? Yeah. What do we say about the Trinity? What do we say about Jesus? It's then less clear what the religion would become.
Yeah, I heard that's a theory. Like that was how like Islam came about, or one like origin theory was where you've got like a non-Trinitarian sect,
right?
Christianity or some other Abrahamic faith, because it like Muslims accept that the vast majority of things that Jesus did were, you know, like happened. They just believe he's a prophet of God, not the Son of God.
Right.
They believe in the Immaculate Conception. I was shocked to hear, and I wish more people knew this as well, because I think it promote more like good faith among
this is Islam that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay. So
from what I heard, because I got like a bunch of like flyers on Islam from one of my Muslim friends.
Okay.
When I saw him at like his Islamic Society like stall in my previous university, I went to go say hi, and like the Mother Mary is mentioned more times by name in the Quran than Muhammad.
Yes.
And I was like, whoa. Like,
that's weird. I didn't.
As
know
a Christian, you would not expect that, right? Like,
no, you
there's contrast to the narratives that people always put out.
Right.
You know, and
But
I'm like,
there's
they're
a
actually
lot
quite similar. And the way, sorry to cut in.
Oh, no.
Like, so the way Remy, my friend who lived in Egypt, explained it, all of his friends, because he was a practicing Catholic.
Yeah.
He said all his friends who were Muslim were like, Remy, you're like 90% of the way to being Muslim. Like, you know, they imagine the Abrahamic faiths as like, let's say the Judaism is like the model one of like the Toyota Corolla or something, right? Then you have like Christianity, like new and improved, right? A couple years later. And then like Islam is like the final version. Like,
yes.
That's it, you know, that's the shiny one. So they're like, Remy, like, you know, you're almost there. Just do these few things, and you are a Muslim. Like
that's so funny.
You know, so they were like, you're like 90% of the way there.
I'm just trying to picture myself saying that too.
Yeah.
An adherent of Judaism or
exactly.
to a Muslim.
Yeah,
you're almost here, and that is
Yeah.
true. The theistic religions are much more similar to each other than they are to any other religion or worldview.
Yeah.
And so then the question will be, what is the justification for those distinctly Christian beliefs?
Yeah.
If there is justification for them and not similarly strong justification for specifically Islamic beliefs or Jewish beliefs, well, whether they're similar or not, the rational thing in that case would be to be a Christian.
Yeah.
So it does come down to whether or not we think there are good reasons to accept those distinctly Christian beliefs.
Yeah.
Especially given that the worldview is so similar to Judaism or Islam. It will come down to the details.
Yeah.
I think anyway.
Yeah. It's just pretty wild. I heard one of the differences. I mean, obviously Christians eat pork, whereas Jews don't, which is before Christianity, and Muslims don't, which was after Christianity.
Yeah.
So was Jesus kind of like, hang on a minute, guys, you ever heard of bacon? Like,
right. Well, he did. Yeah. I mean,
I can't remember the details. I haven't read the part of the Bible, but apparently there's a bit where he's like, okay, these things from the Old Testament, forget them. Was that including prawns and eating pork or something? I don't know.
Yeah, I think he did. If my memory serves, both Jesus and the Apostle Paul declared all foods clean, essentially.
Yeah.
So negating that aspect of the Old Testament law. But it will come down to how you deal with Jesus of Nazareth.
Yeah.
That will be the defining feature of your specific version of theism, of belief in God, whether you're a Muslim, Jewish, or a Christian. What do you think about Jesus?
Yeah.
If you think he is the Son of God, God incarnate, and if you think he died on the cross for the sins of the world, that is Christianity. And if you deny those things, well, those are robust and essential claims of Christianity. So then you're not a Christian, despite what other similarities you may have. I do think that is a substantive difference between the three, is that Christianity invests Jesus of Nazareth with a profoundly different understanding and viewpoint than these other religions, which would just see him as a human prophet. I mean, that's all the difference in the world. If you think he was God versus thinking he was just a man.
Yeah.
That's a pretty substantial point.
Yeah.
So then you ask, well, then, okay, how do we adjudicate between these two competing viewpoints?
Yeah. I remember my friend Javan was saying, he's Christian, he was saying, you know, either Jesus is like, you know, he is what he is, you know, and he is the Son of God, or he's the greatest con man on the planet.
Yeah.
Right? So...
absolutely. And, I was reading about Jesus mythicists recently. There's this small body of fringe scholars that think Jesus never even existed.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Right.
The vast majority of New Testament scholars believe he existed at least, but they'll argue about the details.
Yeah.
But very few people defend the claim that he wasn't real at all. But that would be another possibility, and perhaps there was no Jesus whatsoever. But I think you'd have a lot of arguments that you'd have to address to establish that.
Yeah. No, I feel like it must have existed in the same way. I'm sure the Prophet Muhammad existed.
Right.
Right. In the same way, I'm sure Buddha existed.
Right.
Whether they did all the things they said they'd done, or that's a different question. But I'm certain they existed as people.
Yeah. It would be pretty amazing.
If there was all these stories about, I don't know, I guess you say all the stories about, I don't know, King Henry VIII or, I don't know, Plato, you're like, they're older than, Plato's older than Jesus, etc.
Right.
We don't doubt Plato's existence.
No.
But I guess it'll be the claims that Plato, I don't know, walked on water and turned water into wine.
The legends that surrounded him.
Not that Plato did those things, but just saying things that Jesus supposedly did. That's the question for me.
Yeah, and I think that is the meaningful question.
Yeah.
We can take it for granted that there was a person Jesus in first century Palestine, but then the question would be, to what extent are the Gospels accurate portrayals of what Jesus said and did?
Yeah.
And to what extent are they not?
Yeah.
And I mean, that's not a philosophical question, it's a historical one, but it's in the exact same tradition of asking, okay, are these beliefs true?
Yeah.
And I'm also interested in that in New Testament history, in addition to philosophy proper.
Yeah, that's mad. So one thing I wanted to, I briefly mentioned it to you earlier, muscular Christianity. I'll explain the spiel now. So it's this cool Wikipedia page I found, which is, it was this Christian movement that originated in like 1800s England. I guess the core idea is like, if you're trying to, be a good Christian and, vanquish evil and defend the weak and all of that, you can't do that if you're an absolute stick, right? Like, your body is your temple, so you need to get buff.
Yes.
In order to be and act as a good Christian.
Yes.
And like, because, you were saying earlier, you hit the gym. I can see your rippling bicep veins from here. So, so I was like, oh, and I see it, and I'm like, yeah, like, good morals and like, good muscles. Like,
oh my God, that's my new tagline.
Yeah.
I'm gonna use that. That's funny.
Please do. So,
what did you say? Good morals and good muscles.
yeah, absolutely. And I just find it so like. I find it very appealing.
Yes, I think that most Christians don't automatically have that.
I think we
mentality.
need to normalize this in the church.
I agree with you. I think I agree with that principle insofar as it's that you should neglect neither the mind nor the body.
Yeah.
So you want fitness and health of mind and of body. And so I try to, me personally, work on both of those fronts.
Yeah.
That would be all my thoughts on muscular Christianity.
I just want to claim its existence.
Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah.
And I know nothing about it, but I guess I support it.
Yeah.
Unless there's probably more to it.
Yeah, I think it's like emphasizing like virility and
the whole like
masculinity and stuff.
I was gonna say
I have no problem with that personally. Like, but
well, it'll depend.
It depends what you mean, I guess.
It does. I don't want to go to the full extreme of that. There is no particular benefit to being masculine, but I think that the problem is that a lot of people who make claims like that end up arguing for very toxic forms of masculinity as the good parts, and I don't know about that. It's something I've thought
too. What
too.
would that entail?
Well, I don't know. I think of Andrew Tate primarily as an advocate of what I would strenuously reject, and as I think is so misconceived and unhelpful and unhealthy.
Yeah.
But certain things Jordan Peterson says about masculinity, I respond to well. Yeah. So I think I
clean your room.
Right. No, I think I could piss off a lot of people on both sides of the debate.
No, that's good.
But I think that's how you need to do it, is think through things on a case by case basis.
Nice, cool. What are your thoughts on Jordan Peterson?
Well, that's a great question. My extent of my understanding of him is pretty limited. I've watched a fair amount of YouTube content, either by him or of him. I tried to read 12 Rules for Life. I think I read the first 2 chapters, and it just didn't grab me.
Okay.
I didn't find anything objectionable in it. It just didn't get me. I think that Jordan Peterson has a lot of good things to say. There's a lot of beneficial value to some of the things he says. Whereas other things, I think that he has the arrogance of an extremely intelligent person, where you think you can start to talk about topics and areas of study that you really know nothing about. And so sometimes I recoil from certain things he has to say, especially when it comes to religion, where it's clear he has no profound knowledge of the topic at hand.
Oh, like what?
I watched a dialogue between him and Matt Dillahunty, where
who's that?
Matt, he's a prominent YouTube atheist.
Okay.
Yeah, he's more than that, but he also is a YouTube atheist.
Okay, cool.
And Jordan Peterson is extremely, probably intentionally vague when people ask him about his religious views. Do you think God exists? He will sometimes say, what do you mean by do? And what do you mean by exist? Not even what do you mean by God, but what do you mean by do? Seems to me answers like that are ridiculously obscure, and they show that he's trying to hide what he actually thinks, or he doesn't know what he thinks. So he tries to say these profound things that to me are just so silly. Approaching it as a philosopher of religion, where you prize clarity of thought and communication, and clarity of concepts. Seems like he intentionally obscures things. When it comes to religion and God.
Okay, interesting. I find when I've taken like some environmental law classes this term, one thing they really drill down on is like your definitions.
Yes.
It's like define every single thing. Like, so in that sense, I could agree. Maybe not with do, but like defining
Sure.
existence. Like,
I agree with you, but it seems to me that the question is
it more just the nature of God?
Yeah,
the big
so
question.
it's perfectly appropriate to say, okay, what do you mean by God? So then I can see if I believe or not in that being.
Yeah.
But when he has gone through so many dialogues with atheists and theists, and he will not commit to a specific viewpoint on the topic of God's existence, you have to wonder whether or not he's doing that intentionally, trying to walk the line between committing to either side of the debate. Because I agree.
Without just saying, I don't know what I think.
Right. You could even say
That's
I
what
don't
I'd
know.
say. I'm like,
Or-
I'm agnostic. Like,
But some of the things he says are most naturally interpreted as he thinks ultimately that belief in God is a big fiction, that the Bible is fictional, and that our understanding of God is a useful, valuable, but still fiction. But he doesn't want to come right out and say that because, if nothing else, from a political standpoint, then he would be isolating people who actually do literally believe in God. So he wants to have as big a tent as possible of his support. Maybe. I could be wrong about that or whatever his personal motivations may be. But I think the question, does God exist and do you believe in him, with a little bit of clarification, can become well understood and meaningful as a question. Yeah. You don't have to go all the way to the bottom of a conceptual landscape to understand what that question means and to answer it, you know.
Okay, cool, nice.
So anyway, but I think that he's a very, very intelligent person. You can't deny that.
Oh no.
If you think he's an idiot,
you're an idiot.
Paying attention.
No,
you can critique what he says.
Yes,
and you could say this is wrong or this thing he is saying here is idiocy, but he is very intelligent. So I like to listen to what he has to say on a topic.
Same.
At least while I'm thinking what I think. I may not agree with him, but I want to hear what he has to say.
Absolutely.
So I do have overall a positive viewpoint of him for the most part, but I just think that there are some times where he is so smart that he can sound smart saying things that in the end have very little substance when you see them written down.
Yeah.
A lot of his lectures, for example, can become extremely long-winded, where he articulates like every single detail and goes off on tangents, and it's very disorganized.
Yeah.
And he is intelligent. Hearing him talk, and he's saying intelligent things, but at the end of the day, he could have said all of that with the same information in like 2 minutes, and he turned it into like a 30-minute lecture.
That's true. See, I went to go see him in a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
I think in September I went to go see him speak at Birmingham because I quite like him. Like,
oh yeah.
So he's brought a lot of value to my life.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think we got through. It was like just a live Q&A session.
Yes.
They got through like 4 questions the whole time, and like, you know, one of them like I don't know. Even one of them was like, you know, what was it like meeting Messi? Like he met Messi a couple of weeks before, and everyone, you know, bang. I mean, that was the last question, but it was like, you know, it's like a half an hour thing or like a, you know, I mean, and it was really interesting and good.
Yes, I just pride myself on being able to
be succinct,
say the most that I can in as few words as possible.
Yeah,
I think that's an important skill.
Oh, definitely.
In communication, not trying to take a simple point and pull out as much intellectual content as you can.
Yeah,
it's not. So that would be more of a subjective gripe, but still, it's something I've noticed from time to time.
Yeah, cool, nice. Okay, I think we went. I mean, I didn't mind tangents and bunny.
Oh no, you can decide if you want to include that.
Oh no, we will.
Yeah.
But no, nice. We'll do a bit of a topic change then. Mm-hmm. So yeah, life at Oxford. How are you finding it?
I've been telling people multiple times, different family members back home, that like so often in life when there's something really good ahead of you that you're anticipating, it usually disappoints once it comes around. It's not as great as you thought it would be. You're not as happy, whatever. That's not the case here at Oxford. From the moment I got off that bus until now, 2 months later, it's been awesome. Yeah. I have loved it so much. It hasn't been perfect. There have been some ups and downs as you meet new people, try and make friends, deal with your own insecurities.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that shit gets real, especially when you're in a whole new country. Everybody's new, and everyone's really smart.
Oh, yeah.
All your own insecurities kind of come forward. But if you get through that, you find stable friends. I mean, it's amazing. It's such a privilege walking through college or the Bodleian Library.
Yeah.
I love it all. All of it.
It's
so much fun. It's good food, good friends, good education.
Oh yeah,
I enjoy my
absolutely,
studies. I couldn't have asked for a better way for this to all turn out going to grad school. Like,
absolutely.
kind of went the best possible way.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
it's crazy.
It is. So I found it wonderful, and I like that it's a smaller city.
Yeah. It's walkable.
Yeah, it's walkable. I have a bike, and then you really can get anywhere quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I've really grown to it. You know, we'll see how I feel in like 5 years.
Yeah.
But for now, anyway, it's great.
Oh, so is your master's, is it 2 years?
Mhm.
And then you want to do a doctorate, I presume?
Yeah, and hopefully here.
Yeah.
I would love to just.
I want to stay at least another year. So
Yeah.
I'm like, can I do a research position
Oh yeah,
or something?
yeah,
You know, I don't really extend my degree. I don't want to pay that extra money, but I would happily stay an extra year at least. Like,
yeah.
it's just great.
I agree with you, and so yeah, I've had for a while. I had, and I still kind of do, the mentality of just waiting for the other shoe to drop. Right? I'm like, when is the bad shit gonna catch up to me? There's got to be a catch here.
Yeah.
So far, no catch.
That's fair. Yeah, that's an interesting
It's
thought. Sometimes
yeah.
you're like, things are going so well, like something must be wrong, and
Yeah.
your mind starts to try and make issues.
It does.
Right?
You try to sabotage it for some reason, but
Yeah.
no, I like I said, there have been things that have been less than pleasant, but judged from the big picture perspective, this has been nothing but great stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
What were your preconceptions? Like, have there been any preconceptions that have been dispelled, and that any of them been like confirmed? I'd say it's definitely true. Everyone's smart, at least at master's level, and like doctorates. Like,
Yes,
everyone's super smart.
but so my expectation was, I tend to catastrophize rather than assume things will be great. I assume they'll be the worst possible outcome.
Yeah.
And it's not healthy, but I do that. And I was worried about the kind of people I would meet and interact with at Oxford. I didn't know what Oxford students and graduate students would be like. And I was worried that I would get here and everyone would be so much smarter, more brilliant, more talented than me.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't know what to do. I knew that would hit me hard, and it would be a negative experience to suddenly feel so lesser than other people.
Yeah.
So that's what I was worried about. But then when I got here, of course, in hindsight, this makes perfect sense. They're just people.
Yeah.
These aren't like gods walking among us.
Yeah.
And I feel like I fit right in.
Yeah.
You know, so that's been a very self-affirming
Absolutely.
kind of experience where you realize, no, I'm one of them too.
Exactly.
So
I think academically, especially, like, so many people in my course have said, oh, it's so weird. Like, normally I'm the only one who enjoys talking about these academic things. And suddenly everyone likes talking about them, right?
yes.
So everyone's like, I thought I was the only one of me. And I'm like,
Yes.
no, you're not.
Yes.
I mean, obviously everyone's unique, but I think, it's been really refreshing to...
It is.
Everyone's just a super nerd.
Everyone is
about
a super
their thing,
nerd, and it adds some accountability to your daily studying because all of your friends are serious about their studies and their studying, and so that pressures you to be serious too.
Yeah.
In those moments when you don't want to be.
Absolutely.
So it's positive peer pressure
I
all the way
agree.
around.
Yeah. Nice. What would you say regarding... I think insecurity is a good topic then. I mean, there's even the specific term like Oxford imposter syndrome.
Really?
Right, yeah. So
Yeah,
like,
okay.
because I was really worried. I had like big imposter syndrome before I even got in.
Yeah.
Because I was just imagining like, or before I even got here rather, because I was like, I was really excited to meet my course mates.
Yes.
I tried stalking them online on LinkedIn. I couldn't find anyone who was doing the degree this year.
Okay.
I found people who have done my degree previously, but I couldn't find anything. I was like, what are they going to be like?
Yep.
I was imagining like some absolute gods, right?
Yes.
And
Same.
And like I slept like 2 hours before we all met each other, like that night before. I was just so nervous I couldn't sleep. But everyone's just been like so lovely, like, and in college as well, you know, just generally like, yeah. And obviously everyone is very intellectual, but Oxford imposter syndrome. You feel like everyone else is super smart, and you're like the idiot who got in by luck. Right?
That I was, and I for a long time before getting here, I tell people, I'm like, maybe it was just a fluke.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah.
But it's not, and you then find out and you realize that there are different kinds of intelligence.
Yes.
And you're not always able to compare which is a good thing. You can't always compare yourself to other people.
No.
Even if you were intelligent in the exact same way, you shouldn't compare. But what's nice is that, you know, you can have people who have a skill set aimed towards mathematics, people who can write really good papers, people who are good at communicating. people whose thing is politics, and
Yeah.
they may be not very good in the area that you're really good at. And so there's a whole lot less direct competition than I thought there would be.
Absolutely.
Because we're all doing different things and we
Exactly.
can support each other.
Yeah.
It's not like we're all sitting in the same exact class day after day, doing the same tests, writing the same papers like you would in middle school or high school. I was in a very toxically competitive environment in high school especially. And I didn't want to go back to that. And I haven't at all. Because we're past that now. We are pursuing our passions. And for many of us, unless you're only friends with people in your course, you're doing different things.
Yeah.
And so there's just no chance for toxic competitiveness to take hold.
Yeah.
Which I think is a good thing.
It's very nice, especially saying conservation. Like, we're all trying to save the elephants. Like,
Yes.
Like, if there was toxic competitiveness, like, it's like, oh yeah, I'm going to save the elephants better than you are, chump. It's like, it's still a net positive.
Yes.
Obviously, that's a dumb example, but like,
No.
it doesn't even...
If you're doing it for the right
yeah,
reasons.
Exactly. But... yeah, it's nice. I've heard the NBA, apparently, from what I've heard, everyone's quite competitive on that.
That might be right.
I can't even
like
imagine
law
how
school.
it works, like the competitiveness.
Yeah.
Because I've been so far removed from that now.
Yes. If it's anything like my high school was, it can be very productive if you're a competitive person. You will stretch yourself to do amazing things, but it comes at a cost.
Yeah.
It becomes very unhealthy very fast.
Yeah.
To compare yourself constantly to the 3 or 4 or 5 people who are closest to you, and
Yeah.
it's not great.
Yeah.
It's not great.
How do you deal with comparing, like the urge to compare yourself to others when those thoughts come in? What do you think to yourself to like
To not
yeah
do that. Well, like now or back in the day, or
let's say both.
yeah. Well, back in the day, I just gave into it, and I was like,
Yeah.
I'm going to be the best out of all of these people, and so then it was just go time all of the time.
Yeah.
Followed by extreme disappointment when someone else would beat me out on the top grade of a test or whatever it might be. Fortunately, hopefully, I've grown past that, grown up a lot. And now I haven't had a lot of chance for a competitive mindset to take place because I'm really doing my own thing.
Yeah.
Even relative to my course mates, we don't study the same things each week. We're generally in different areas within this broad course. So there's no possibility of one-to-one competition. I guess if they all got like published before I did, peer-reviewed articles published, that would make me feel pretty inadequate, and I'd have to do a lot of mature acceptance that it's okay that I didn't, but that hasn't happened. So I guess we'll find out how I deal with it if and when it happens, but I think it'll come down to accepting that you're doing your best, and that is the only thing that matters, because that's the only thing you can do.
Exactly.
You can't guarantee you're going to be the best.
Yeah.
You can only guarantee that you're doing your best.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's
100%.
easy to preach, but in practice, it's hard to accept that.
Exactly. I think, that's why I say my metaphor is like, I always try and put my best foot forward.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's because I've been doing salsa dancing for a year.
Nice.
It's a dancing thing, but I was like, as long as you know you're doing your best and you've got your best intentions at heart.
Yes.
Which, you have to be careful to, and introspect that you do have your best intentions at heart.
Yes.
And that you've got no malicious, thoughts popping in. But if you know that you're doing your best, then, I feel like you can rest assured knowing that, regardless of the outcome.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think also this is something that I only learned recently and really felt the wisdom of, that when there are people that do better than you at whatever it is that you're comparing yourself to them in, look at it as an opportunity to learn from them and to grow and to be grateful for the fact that this person is better than you in this area, and it can inspire you to do more and to work harder and to push yourself. I think if you look at it productively and positively, and you look at the people who may be better than you in these areas with kindness and with love, and you see them as a resource to inspire you to do more, I think that's a healthy way of dealing
100%.
with it.
That's a really good.
Rather than sitting back and going, fuck them.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's very easy to get jealous.
Why are they
if
better
you see
than me?
someone-
Yes.
Yeah.
So the antidote to jealousy will, in many instances, be like a type of gratitude.
100%.
I think.
100%.
Again, it's very preachy, but I do think it's right.
Yeah. Oh no, I agree. And I think it's very difficult to put into practice, because then when you do have a jealous thought, then it takes a lot to then be like, actually, I'm grateful. Like,
Yes.
That
there's this.
grateful for the opportunity.
So, for example, I won't name names, but I'm pretty good at piano.
Yeah.
Like I'm usually people love to listen to me play whatever. I've got took lessons for 10 years, and so I have a certain bass skill.
Yes. Nice.
But I have run into people here who are just brilliant piano players, playing the most complex things that sound so beautiful. And it would be very easy for a younger Miles to resent them for that. But I am happy to report that when that happened, and when it has continued to happen, I just appreciate them, and I appreciate the music, and it's like, that's amazing, dude.
Exactly.
What you're doing is really cool. And then it makes me want to go home and learn a new song.
Yeah.
But that's a positive outcome of seeing someone do something so much better than you, rather than going home and being angry with that person.
100%. That's so true.
Yeah. It is just funny though that academically, they're just, given the way the system is set up, there isn't much chance for that kind of toxic competitiveness.
Yeah. I guess also the fact that you don't get marks for your
Also
essays.
that.
Because like at first you might hear that, dear listeners, and think, what, you're not getting marks for your essays at your master's level? But like, or at least in Miles's case. But when you're peer reviewing, or if you're publishing a paper, nobody's going to give you a mark for it. It's just your thoughts. So,
correct. I actually reflect on
and
the
marks
same
according
point.
to whom? Like, who decides?
Right. You either get published or you don't. It's not like here's how this compares to this other professor's paper. You're entirely right. I think what I think anyway, and I'm only 6 weeks into the program, but what it's teaching me and what it's shaping up to teach me over the long haul is how to just decide to do my best and how to be my own judge of a paper.
Yeah.
To decide for myself how good it is or where it needs to improve, rather than relying on an external rubric or standard. You have to, because I want to be a professor, a research professor, and teach as well. It'll be up to me to write those papers as good as I can and submit them only when I think that they're good enough.
Yeah.
And then they will accept it or reject it, but there's no getting graded by somebody else. You have to learn to do it yourself.
Yeah.
To motivate improvement yourself. And that's a whole different skill. So it's cool that Oxford allows you to develop that.
Yeah. I do like it. Like, I don't have any graded exams till like the end.
I do, exactly.
Yeah.
There are, at the very end of the 2-year program, there's a massive amount of exams, and they will grade you there.
That's
until
the stress.
then, you don't have to deal with that.
Exactly, yeah. Nice. So one thing we also touched on earlier, I found an interesting phenomenon I've seen is, like, I feel like people, maybe just because, we're in the West where the main religion has been Christianity, so people have more gripes with it, but I feel like people will often, they'll beef on Christianity and shit on it in a way that they wouldn't get away with talking about another religion.
Yeah.
They'd be, if you said those things, I won't name names, but for example, one person I saw last year was in one of my classes, she'd be like, oh, that guy's a Christian, like, ugh, gross. Like, I was like, if you said that about like a Muslim, or a Buddhist or a Hindu, like,
it would be
you'd get
socially catastrophic.
Exactly, you get roasted onto it, but somehow people let it slide and think it's okay.
Yeah.
So I'm like, what have you been your experiences? Has anyone ever like bashed you that you found? Because
No.
I often find that it seems to be the people who seem to, on the surface, be present themselves as more tolerant and loving, and I'm like, no, you're only tolerant and loving to a certain subset of things that agree with you.
Yes.
Right?
It's funny, I have very mixed feelings about that fact, because it is true.
Yeah.
But I am very conflicted on precisely that issue.
Yeah.
Because I too have these negative impulses towards my fellow Christians.
Yeah.
So, and I would just be lying to you if I said anything else.
Yeah.
Like, why are people doing that? That's terrible.
Yeah.
No, I get the impulse. And I think it stems from a couple of things. One being that Christianity is the largest religion in the world. It, in some sense, it won, right?
Yeah.
And so it is, just in general, whatever the context may be, it's easier and more acceptable to dunk on the winner than to attack Jainism, which is a small,
Yeah. Fair enough.
And so I think that just kind of legitimizes the project more, but also probably even more of a reason is the historical impact of Christianity, which I do think has been largely positive, but most people are only aware of the profoundly negative impacts of Christianity on world history.
Yeah.
And so it's those things that stick out in their mind. And else besides, the third one, I keep saying this, but this one is actually probably the main one, is the social impact of Christianity, especially in the United States. Because I don't know its legacy in European nations, but in the United States anyway, especially conservative brands of Christianity, have made a bad name for themselves because of certain hateful and intolerant attitudes.
Okay.
From some of them, not from all of them, but from many
people disagree
prominent
obviously then,
examples. The resistance of the Christian church to same-sex marriage, or just to, homosexual relationships in general, puts a bad taste in people's mouths.
Is that not the case with the other Abrahamic religions? So?
Not as, I think, publicly. I don't know that they've, in the same way, made the same kind of media presence of picking that particular issue to make a stand on, to take a stand on.
Yeah.
Sexual ethics.
Yeah.
And so I think people see that and they respond very negatively to it.
Okay.
Whether it's fair or whether it's an outsized reaction to the actual issue is a good question. I actually, as a gay man, think that by and large, many Christian leaders' comments about same-sex relationships are not intolerant or hateful. They're usually very careful with their words, and they just express that they believe this is what the Bible teaches, and so they have to be consistent with their worldview. I respect that. I really do. I don't have animus towards that kind of person. It's the Westboro Baptist Church type people that hold up horrendous signs at veterans' funerals, for example, that is obviously hateful, and what I think a lot of people will just automatically tie in to Christianity at large. But that's not fair. So you would have to get really specific, I think, in talking with people about, why do you have this negative impression? Because it's hard growing up Christian. I didn't have that perspective taught to me, so it's not always clear to me why. I just know that is the perspective, certainly. Yeah. And I think it's going. And another issue would be abortion. For people convinced that this is an issue of women's rights over their bodies, it's going to seem very horrifying that there is a group of people associated with one religion that tries to deny them certain reproductive rights. I get that. That would be horrifying. And so then that I think makes sense why you'd have such a negative opinion of Christianity in general. When they made these very distinct political stances that struck many people as morally abhorrent.
I mean, I guess one could argue they're political, but in the same sense, obviously, it's a religious foundation, right? So I think when people talk about, not that I want this to turn into an abortion debate. But I think the difference that people fail to see, I think ultimately the question always comes down to whether you believe a fetus is a person or not. Because if you believe a fetus is a person, then murder is murder, right? And obviously that's like one of the 10 commandments is thou shalt not murder, right? So then that was going to dictate what you think, regardless of, which religion, I'm sure other religions probably have similar views in Christianity. Right. But conversely, if you think, until it comes out of the womb, or, the point at which a fetus becomes a person is at a later stage in development or wherever. Right. Before that period, if you're like, oh, it's the same as popping a pimple, then, then obviously you'll be like, oh, like, you wouldn't let me, if I were to try and stop a woman popping a pimple on her, like, cheek or something, then obviously I'm just being a,
Right, but it's even worse. Right? I mean, so, the psychological, physical, financial consequences of...
Yeah, obviously it's not a pimple, but...
Right, of carrying a baby to term, but yes. The principle is the same. So I agree with you, actually.
So I think that's what people always go on other debates, and I'm like, but what do you think about this one issue? Yes. Because that's going to dictate what you think about everything else.
It is. I think the key question in the abortion debate is, what do we think about the personhood of the unborn fetus through every part of its development? Because if it is a person, a human person from the beginning, that settles most of the significant moral questions surrounding abortion. Conversely, if it's not, it clearly is a matter of a woman's reproductive rights. I was just defending the claim that if you are convinced the fetus is not a person, and at least in its early stages of development is part of a woman's body, you would be horrified by what you take to be the infringement of your bodily autonomy by this religious organization. But I do, again, like with issues of same-sex relationships and Christians' viewpoints on that, I don't have animus towards the pro-life position, because I think for most people it is positively motivated. It has a
100%.
proper motivation. They think that this is murder.
Yeah.
And if you grant that premise that the fetus is a person, their position is the only morally acceptable one. They should be fighting for this every day.
Yeah.
So I have a sympathy with both sides of the debate in that respect, where they're both genuinely, authentically motivated.
Yeah.
It will just come down to who has the right viewpoint on the person or the fetus.
Yeah.
But I don't have the same emotional, to make it even more relevant, I don't have the same emotional reaction that a lot of people do to same-sex relationships or towards abortion.
Yeah.
I could see a retort coming that, well, I'm not a woman, I don't ever have to face the consequences of not being able to have an abortion. But that wouldn't, even in the case of same-sex marriages and relationships where I am directly implicated, I still don't have that animus towards Christianity. So I think it's important to be charitable on all sides of the debate when you can.
100%.
It's very easy to cast your opponent as morally corrupt, especially when they're expounding viewpoints you disagree with so deeply. Yeah, we always have to remember that far more often than not, they're not bad people or badly motivated.
No, that's what I found nice about, especially, I can't speak for undergraduates because I haven't spoken to that many. Yeah, because we're in our masters and doctorates bubbles. Right, our college is a doctorate and masters only college. Yeah, but everyone's been very able to have mature and intellectual conversations. They don't. Yes. They don't devolve into dumb. No. Tribalism. Right. Right. But I found it very intellectual and stimulating.
I've yet to have a lot of deep, Socratic style conversations about those kinds of questions. It'll more just be people grilling me on what I'm studying. Yeah. Rather than a, more long form conversation like this one. Yeah. But I have found that the times that people do ask me about it, they're very respectful. Yeah. That was the other thing I was worried about, is I knew that the United Kingdom was predominantly secular, much more so than the United States, and so I was worried that I would be negatively impacted socially for being a Christian. But
I found quite a lot of Christians in Oxford so far. Maybe that's just because we go to a church study group.
We do, yeah.
I have found quite a lot.
We look for them. We've found a place where they congregate. Yeah. But there are, I go to this one club called the Socratic Society. Oh, yeah? And so every week on Friday, they debate some big question of politics or philosophy. And there's a lot of Christians there, too. Okay. So there's a population for it, for certain. Yeah. But even among people who are atheist or agnostic, they're not malicious at all. Sometimes they don't really care about the topic that much, and so they don't have a negative viewpoint of Christianity, or at least to me. So that's been a fulfilling experience.
Yeah, it's nice.
Most people are pretty tolerant here.
Yeah, it's cool. Nice. Okay. One other thing I was thinking about when we touched on politics earlier, I feel like with the decline of religion, people are still religious. They just, people are looking for their right, quick quote, right, worldview and what makes a good person and how to live a good life and, what actions that requires. And I think with the decline of religion, people are just finding that in politics, which are much more incomplete and much younger ideologies.
Well, that's interesting.
Do you think people one of the reasons we're so tribalistic with politics these days? I'm not saying we as you and I, but in society people or what you see in media and stuff. Do you think that has anything to do with the decline of religion and people kind of attaching onto political ideologies as their?
Yeah. Well, I think that's an important sociological question, which I haven't studied at all. So these are just speculation, somewhat worthless observations in terms of their evidential value. But it seems to me that that's probably right. That the religious impulse exists among us no matter what. It's programmed into us by evolution. And so even if you take religion away entirely, completely, you still have the impulse and it will find a substitute. Yeah. That's probably right. It's probably right that people then invest political ideologies with religious significance. Yeah. And they identify with it in the same way that people formerly would identify with a religion. I think that's right. I think that's why also in the United States, society has become so much more polarized over time. It's because you have over time elevated your specific ideology higher and higher towards religious significance. And so then people who disagree with you aren't just disagreeing with their politics. They're disagreeing with something. Exactly. They're heretics. They're disagreeing with something you identify with. Yeah. I don't have that. I'm fairly in the middle, and I've never had the same kind of view on a specific political ideology,
Yeah.
where I've made it part of me. But a lot of people do.
Yeah.
A lot of people do.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's easier to have a conversation with someone who disagrees with you religiously than it is with someone who disagrees with you politically.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
I'd say so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At least in certain contexts. So I think that's a point well taken.
Yeah.
Could be wrong though. Like I said, don't know
Yeah.
anything about sociology, but I think
me neither,
that's
yeah.
just
Just a hunch.
plausibility to that. Yeah.
Nice. So yeah, what are the top lessons you learned from the Bible and Christianity?
Like
Yeah.
life lessons?
Yeah. What would you wish people to know?
The Bible and Christianity life lessons. I take great inspiration from the teaching that specifically in 1st through 3rd John, letters near the end of the New Testament, that God is love. And I think that dovetails with the passage in Corinthians that Paul wrote, listing off the characteristics of what love is. And he ends by saying, you have faith, hope, and love, and the greatest of these is love. And he goes on a long list of achievements in life you could have, and achievements even in a spiritual and religious life. But if you don't love, then all of it is nothing. And I think that's right.
Yeah.
I have committed to that since I first heard it when I was young. I mean, that just strikes to be something of the ultimate truth. And whether or not that by itself is enough, agreeing to those things to be called Christian, I don't know. But that is probably what I would be most certain of. And whether or not Christians through history and today reflect that belief in their practice, maybe not always anyway, but I think that they try, and I certainly try.
Yeah.
Where it is, love needs to be the defining feature of what you do and what you say. And again, maybe that's not the entire Bible, but it certainly is true that is taught there. So that's what I've always grabbed onto.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a nice place to wrap up.
Absolutely, sure.
Yeah, nice.
Well, thank you, sir. This has been fun.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is a question I'm putting at the end of everything. But
Oh, yeah,
I feel like
yeah.
it might just be repeating of what you said. If you had a billboard to the world,
Yeah.
you could pop it on, float it in the sky, everyone could see it.
Yeah.
What would your message be?
I think just from me, Miles Donahue, what would
Yes,
my message?
yeah.
It would be.
It can be as silly as you want, it can be as serious as you want.
Let's continue on. It would be kind and be loving. I
Yeah.
think would be what I would want to be known as my message.
Yeah, I think that shines through in your personality, mate. You're a
Oh,
very,
thank you.
very positive guy.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Nice. Amen.
Amen.
Nice.
All right, well. Cool.
Sweet.
There we have it, ladies and gents. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Miles and I had a blast recording this one, and we hope you had a great time joining us for this conversation, wherever you're tuning in from. There was certainly a time when I bashed religion, but I've come to realise that there is a lot of value you can derive from them, even if you're not of that specific religion, or any for that matter. There's a lot of wisdom on how to live a good life, and I'm sure we could all benefit from a bit more of that, and opening our minds on this matter. If you've listened to the end, you're an absolute boss. Thank you very much. Make sure to follow this podcast on your favourite streaming platform, subscribe to my free newsletter at jamiebolam.substack.com, and follow me on Instagram at jamie.a.bolam. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.